The C-130. Hercules was 12 minutes into what should have been a routine supply run when the first missile warning screamed through the cockpit. Captain Corinne Parker's hands were already moving before her co-pilot could react, throwing the massive transport into a dive that cargo planes weren't designed to execute. The heat-seeking missile streaked past where they'd been 3 seconds earlier, close enough that its exhaust trail left scorch marks on the fuselage. "Brake left! Brake left!" her co-pilot shouted, but Corinne was already banking hard, the 4 turboprop engines screaming in protest as she pushed the Hercules through maneuvers that would make fighter pilots nervous. Then, the radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. "Shrike 3, this is Viper 6. We have 12, repeat 12, enemy fighters inbound on your position. Russian-made Su-25s. You need to abort and return to base immediately." Her loadmaster's voice came through the intercom, tight with fear. "Captain, we've got 20 wounded soldiers in the back. If we turn around now, they won't make it to the field hospital in time." Corinne's eyes flicked to the threat display, watching the hostile aircraft converging on their position like wolves surrounding wounded prey. 12 fighters, 1 unarmed transport, 20 dying soldiers. The mathematics were impossible. Behind her in the cargo bay, men were bleeding out. Men who'd trusted that she'd get them home. Men whose families were waiting for them to come back alive. She made a decision that would either save them all or kill them all. "Viper 6, Shrike 3. Negative on abort. We're continuing to target, and we're going to need some creative solutions." There was a long pause on the radio. Then, "Shrike 3, you're a transport pilot in an unarmed cargo plane. What exactly do you think you're going to do against 12 fighters?" Corinne's hand moved to a panel that most C-130 pilots never touched, a panel that wasn't supposed to be there, a panel that had been installed during a modification program that officially didn't exist. "Something they won't expect," she said quietly, "something they'll never see coming." Before we reveal what happened in the next 24 minutes, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because what Corinne Parker did that day would rewrite the tactical manual and prove that sometimes the most dangerous pilot in the sky is the one nobody takes seriously. Corinne Parker had spent 6 years perfecting the art of being underestimated. At 32, she learned that being a female transport pilot meant constantly fighting assumptions, that she was less skilled, less capable, less deserving of respect than her male counterparts. She'd stopped fighting those assumptions years ago. Instead, she'd learned to use them. Let them think she was just a glorified bus driver. Let them believe that flying a cargo plane required less skill than dogfighting in an F-16. Let them assume that her job was easy, safe, boring. She knew the truth, and on this particular mission, that truth was about to become very relevant. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Fly into forward operating base Hammer, extract 20 critically wounded soldiers, transport them to the field hospital at Kandahar Airfield. Simple milk run. In and out before lunch. The kind of mission she'd flown 100 times before. Except the intelligence had been wrong. Again. The enemy wasn't supposed to have air assets in this region. The Russian-made fighters weren't supposed to be operational. The airspace wasn't supposed to be contested. But supposed to be didn't mean much when missile warning systems were screaming and hostile aircraft were closing at supersonic speeds. Corinne's co-pilot, First Lieutenant Jake Morrison, was staring at the threat display like it might change if he looked hard enough. 25 years old, fresh from training, this was his first real deployment. His hands were white-knuckled on the controls and she could see the fear in his eyes. "Captain," he said, voice cracking slightly, "those are fighters, real fighters. We're not equipped to—" "I know what they are, Morrison." Corinne's voice was calm, almost conversational. She'd learned long ago that panic was contagious, but so was confidence. "And we're going to deal with them. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. First thing, call up the defensive systems menu. Authorization code Parker Delta 77 Tango." Morrison's fingers fumbled with the touchscreen, entering the code. His eyes widened when a new menu appeared. one that definitely wasn't in the standard C-130 operating manual. What the hell is this? Something the Air Force experimented with a few years back. Defensive weapons package for cargo aircraft operating in high-threat environments. They installed it on about 30 planes, then decided it was too expensive and controversial to continue. But they never removed the systems from the aircraft that already had them. And this is one of those aircraft? Why do you think I specifically requested this tail number for high-risk missions? The loadmaster's voice crackled through the intercom again. Captain, the wounded are getting worse. Corpsman says we've got maybe 30 minutes before we start losing people. Corinne checked her navigation display. Kandahar was still 18 minutes away at current speed, but if they had to maneuver against fighters, that time would stretch significantly. Tell the corpsman to strap everything down and prepare for aggressive maneuvering. Things are going to get rough. She pulled up the defensive systems display, quickly scanning the available options. The modifications included chaff and flare dispensers, standard defensive equipment, but also something more exotic. A tail-mounted 25mm GAU-12 equalizer cannon, remote-controlled from the cockpit, and a pair of AM-9X Sidewinder missiles, infrared-guided short-range air-to-air weapons. It wasn't much. Fighter aircraft carried far more armament, but it was something, and sometimes something was enough. Morrison, listen carefully. I'm going to designate you as defensive systems operator. Your job is to manage our countermeasures, chaff, flares, jamming. Watch that threat display. When a missile launches, you deploy countermeasures immediately. Don't wait for my order. Just do it. What are you going to do? Fly and shoot. The first wave of enemy fighters appeared on radar at 30 miles, closing fast. Corinne could see them now through the windscreen, small dark shapes against the bright desert sky, growing larger with terrifying speed. The radio crackled. Shrike 3, Viper 6, those fighters are going weapons hot. You need to abort now. Negative, Viper 6, we have critically wounded on board. Aborting means they die. We're committed. Shrike 3, you're committing suicide. Then you better have some good words ready for my funeral. Shrike 3 out. She switched frequencies, opening a channel to the enemy aircraft. It was a long shot, but sometimes psychological warfare worked. Unidentified aircraft, this is United States Air Force Flight Shrike 3. You are approaching a clearly marked medical evacuation flight carrying wounded personnel. Under international law, we are a protected target. Break off your intercept immediately. The response came in accented but clear English. American transport? You have violated sovereign airspace. Surrender your aircraft or be destroyed. That's not going to happen. Last warning, break off. Laughter came through the radio. You are one cargo plane. We are 12 fighters. You have no weapons. You have no chance. This will be over quickly. Corinne smiled, though there was no humor in it. You're right about one thing. This will be over quickly. She closed the channel and addressed Morrison. Here we go. Remember? Countermeasures on missile launch and hold on to something. The lead fighter opened fire first. A burst of cannon rounds traced through the air, passing well ahead of the Hercules. A warning shot, a demonstration of what was coming. Corinne didn't flinch. She was already calculating angles, speeds, distances. The fighters were coming in too confident, too aggressive. They expected her to run, to panic, to make the mistake that would let them end this easily. She was going to disappoint them. Morrison, deploy chaff, pattern echo. Morrison hit the dispenser, and clouds of metallic strips bloomed behind the Hercules, creating false radar signatures. The fighters spread out, trying to maintain visual contact while their radar went crazy. Good. Confusion was her friend. The second fighter broke from formation, accelerating into a firing position on their 6 o'clock. He was lining up for a missile shot, the kind of textbook attack that would normally end with the target aircraft tumbling from the sky in flames. Corinne waited until the last possible second, until the missile warning system was screaming, and Morrison was about to deploy countermeasures on his own initiative. Then she dropped the Hercules into a dive that should have been impossible for an aircraft that size. The cargo plane plummeted, losing 3,000 feet in seconds. The wounded soldiers in the back screamed as their stretchers shifted despite being strapped down. The airframe groaned in protest, but the missile, unable to track the sudden radical maneuver, streaked past and lost lock. "Jesus Christ," Morrison shouted. "You're going to tear the wings off." "Not today." She pulled up hard, using the Hercules' momentum to gain speed, then immediately broke left. The second fighter overshot, screaming past them at 600 miles per hour, too fast to adjust. Now Corinne did something that no transport pilot should ever attempt. She activated the tail gun. The GAU-12 equalizer spun up with a high-pitched whine, its 5 rotating barrels capable of firing 4,200 rounds per minute. She designated the targeting system, letting the computer calculate lead and deflection, then squeezed the trigger. The cannon roared. 25-millimeter rounds streaked through the air at 3,400 feet per second. The second fighter, already past them and beginning to turn for another pass, flew directly into the stream of fire. The hits were catastrophic. High explosive rounds punched through the fighter's thin aluminum skin, detonating inside the fuselage, shredding hydraulic lines, severing control cables, igniting fuel. The aircraft disintegrated in a fireball that lit up the sky. 1 down, 11 to go. The radio exploded with chatter. The enemy pilots, shocked and confused, trying to understand what just happened, how an unarmed transport had just shot down one of their fighters. Corinne didn't give them time to figure it out. Morrison flares, continuous deployment, and hang on. She threw the Hercules into a hard right turn, using every bit of the aircraft's maneuverability. Cargo planes weren't nimble like fighters, but they could still move when pushed by a pilot who knew their limits. 2 more fighters came in from opposite sides, trying to box her in, force her to choose which threat to defend against. Classic fighter tactics. But Corinne had an advantage they didn't know about. The defensive systems included a comprehensive threat warning suite, giving her 360-degree awareness. She could see both fighters, track their movements, predict their actions. The fighter on the left launched first, an infrared-guided missile, tracking toward the Hercules' hot engine exhaust. "Flares!" Morrison deployed the countermeasures without needing to be told. The missile took the bait, deviating toward the flare's heat signature, detonating harmlessly 200 meters away. The fighter on the right was already firing his cannon, 30-millimeter rounds walking toward the Hercules' fuselage. Corinne couldn't dodge. She was committed to return. But she could return fire. The tailgun swiveled, tracking automatically, compensating for the Hercules' movement and the target's speed. Corinne fired in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition, walking her rounds toward the attacking fighter. The third burst connected. The fighter's left wing shredded as high explosive rounds tore through it. The aircraft immediately began spinning, its pilot ejecting a second before the plane cartwheeled into the desert below. 2 down, 10 to go. But Corinne knew she couldn't keep this up indefinitely. The Hercules was burning fuel fast with all the aggressive maneuvering. Her ammunition was limited, and the enemy pilots were learning, becoming more cautious, more coordinated. She needed to change the game again. "Viper 6, Shrike 3, I could use some help here." "Shrike 3, we're trying. Closest friendly fighters are 12 minutes out. You need to survive that long." 12 minutes. An eternity in air combat. 3 fighters came in simultaneously from different angles, high, low, and level. Professional coordination. They'd figured out she couldn't defend against multiple simultaneous threats. Corinne's mind raced through options. She couldn't outmaneuver all 3, couldn't shoot them all down, couldn't... Wait. She pulled up the weapons system, looking at the 2 AIM-9X Sidewinders mounted under the wings. Modern, highly capable missiles. But they were designed for fighter aircraft, for close-range dogfighting. No one had ever fired them from a C-130. No one had ever tried. "Morrison, I need you to manually unlock the missile stations. Override code Charlie 97 Hotel." "Captain, those missiles, we've never tested them on this platform. The fire control system might not..." "Do it, now!" His hands flew over the controls. The weapon system beeped as the missiles went hot. The 3 fighters were closing. 5 seconds to weapons range. 4, 3. Corinne designated the high target with the missile's seeker head. The AIM-9X's sensor locked on, its sophisticated infrared imaging distinguishing the fighter's heat signature from background noise. She fired. The Sidewinder dropped from the wing pylon, its rocket motor igniting, accelerating the missile to Mach 2.5 in seconds. The pursuing fighter tried to brake, deploying flares, attempting evasive maneuvers. The AIM-9X didn't care. Its imaging infrared seeker could distinguish between flares and actual aircraft. It tracked through the countermeasures, adjusting its course with tiny vectoring thrusters, closing the distance with relentless precision. The warhead detonated 3 feet from the fighter's cockpit. The expanding ring of shrapnel shredded the canopy, killed the pilot instantly, and severed the aircraft's forward control systems. The fighter tumbled from the sky, trailing smoke and debris. 3 down, 9 to go. The low fighter was already firing, his cannon rounds stitching across the Hercules' left wing. Alarms screamed as hydraulic pressure dropped as fuel began streaming from punctured tanks. "We're hit!" Morrison shouted. "Left wing damage, losing hydraulics on the primary system." Corinne felt the controls go mushy as the Hercules lost hydraulic pressure. The aircraft began yawing left, wanting to roll into a spin that would be unrecoverable. She compensated with rudder and aileron, fighting the damaged aircraft, keeping it flying through pure skill and determination. But she couldn't maneuver aggressively anymore. One more hit and they'd go down. The level fighter was lining up for another missile shot. This one she couldn't dodge. Unless... Morrison, dump fuel from the left wing tanks. Emergency jettison. "What? Do it!" He hit the emergency fuel dump. Jet fuel began streaming from the damaged wing, creating a visible mist in the Hercules' wake. The fighter fired his missile, heat-seeking, tracking toward the Hercules' engines, but the cloud of vaporizing jet fuel was hot too. Hot and growing, creating a massive infrared signature that filled the sky behind the cargo plane. The missile locked onto the fuel cloud instead of the engines. It detonated in the middle of the mist, igniting it, creating a massive fireball that momentarily obscured the entire Hercules from view. The low fighter, following close behind his missile, flew directly into the expanding fireball. His aircraft emerged on the other side, but it was burning, critical systems damaged by the extreme heat. He tried to maintain control, but the damage was too severe. He ejected seconds before his fighter exploded. 4 down, 8 to go. But the Hercules was in trouble. Fuel streaming from the damaged wing, hydraulics failing, one engine showing warning lights. They were still 12 minutes from Kandahar, 12 minutes that suddenly seemed impossible. The remaining 8 fighters were regrouping, forming up for a coordinated attack that Corinne knew she couldn't survive. They'd learned their lesson. No more individual attacks, no more underestimating the transport pilot. This time, they were coming with everything. Corinne keyed the radio. "Viper 6, Shrike 3. I'm not going to make it. You need to tell those friendly fighters to hurry. Shrike 3, they're pushing max speed, 6 minutes out." 6 minutes. She had to survive 6 more minutes against 8 fighters with a damaged aircraft and dwindling ammunition. The mathematics said it was impossible. But mathematics didn't account for stubbornness or desperation or the 20 wounded soldiers in her cargo bay who were counting on her to get them home alive. "Morrison, how much ammunition do we have left for the cannon?" He checked the display. 400 rounds, maybe 90 seconds of continuous fire. "And the second Sidewinder?" "Still ready." Corinne studied the tactical display, watching the 8 fighters forming up. They were smart. They'd stay at range, use their missiles, overwhelm her defenses with sheer numbers. She couldn't let them do that. "Morrison, I need you to do something crazy." "More crazy than what we've already done?" "Much more. I need you to take control of the aircraft." He stared at her. "What?" "Take the controls. Fly straight and level. No matter what happens, maintain course for Kandahar." "Where are you going?" "To the cargo bay. I'm going to operate the cannon manually." "Captain, that's insane. The tailgun station isn't designed for manual operation during combat." "It's designed for exactly that. It's just never been used that way." She was already unbuckling, standing up despite the violent maneuvering. "You have the aircraft, Lieutenant. Keep us in the air for the next 6 minutes. That's all I need." She made her way back through the cargo bay, past the wounded soldiers who stared at her with a mixture of fear and hope. The corpsman was working frantically, trying to keep the most critical cases alive, blood on his hands and uniform. "Ma'am?" one of the wounded soldiers called out. "What's happening?" "We're making some new friends," Corinne said, forcing a confidence into her voice that she didn't entirely feel. "Don't worry, we'll get you home." The tailgun station was a small compartment at the rear of the aircraft, barely large enough for one person, equipped with a manual control system that was supposed to be a backup in case the remote controls failed. Corinne squeezed inside, strapped herself into the gunner's seat, and pulled up the optical sight. Through the small armored window, she could see the 8 fighters forming up for their final attack. They were coming in 2 waves of 4, staggered to ensure that if the first wave failed, the second would finish the job. She keyed her headset. "Morrison, I'm in position. When I say break, you break. Hard as you can. Don't think about it. Just do it." "Roger that, ma'am. And Captain? For what it's worth, this has been the craziest mission I've ever flown." It's not over yet. The first wave launched their missiles, 4 heat seekers, converging on the Hercules from different angles, creating a threat envelope that should have been impossible to evade. "Break right! Flares!" Morrison threw the damaged Hercules into a hard right turn. The aircraft shuddered, groaned, threatened to come apart, but it held together. Corinne, strapped into the tailgun station, felt like she was on the world's worst carnival ride, being thrown against her restraints as the massive aircraft twisted through the sky. The flares deployed. 2 of the missiles took the bait. The other 2 kept coming. Corinne grabbed the manual controls, swinging the cannon toward the closest missile. At this range, shooting down an incoming missile was nearly impossible. The closing speed was too high, the target too small, the time too short. She fired anyway. The cannon roared, spitting high explosive rounds into the path of the missile. Most missed, but one, just one, connected. The missile detonated prematurely, its warhead exploding harmlessly 200 meters away. The blast wave rocked the Hercules but didn't destroy it. The 4th missile kept coming. Corinne swung the cannon, but she knew she wouldn't make it. Too close, too fast. Then, a burst of cannon fire from somewhere else intercepted the missile, detonating it just 50 meters from the Hercules. The explosion peppered the fuselage with shrapnel, but the aircraft kept flying. "Shrike 3, this is Eagle 1. Sorry we're late to the party. Let's even up these odds." 2 F-16. Fighting Falcons screamed past the Hercules, their afterburners blazing, vectoring toward the enemy fighters with lethal intent. The cavalry had arrived early, but the second wave of enemy fighters was already attacking. 4 more missiles in the air, 4 more threats that Corinne couldn't evade. The F-16s engaged, their AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles reaching out across the sky, finding targets, eliminating threats. 2 enemy fighters exploded in rapid succession, 6 down, 6 to go. But 4 missiles were still tracking toward the Hercules. The F-16s couldn't stop them all, not in time. Corinne fired the tail cannon, spraying rounds across the sky, creating a wall of steel that 1 missile flew through. It detonated. The second missile she shot down with a concentrated burst that connected purely through luck and desperation. The third missile was intercepted by an F-16's cannon fire, the pilot performing an impossible deflection shot that saved the transport. But the 4th missile kept coming, and Corinne was out of ammunition, out of options, out of time. She watched it approach through the optical sight, tracking straight and true, its seeker head locked on, its warhead armed. In 3 seconds it would hit. In 3 seconds, everyone on board would die. 2 seconds. She thought about her family, about the soldiers in the cargo bay who trusted her, about all the missions she'd flown and all the missions she'd never fly. 1 second. The missile was 50 meters away when Morrison, flying on pure instinct and desperate innovation, deployed every remaining flare and chaff simultaneously while cutting all 4 engines. The sudden loss of a heat signature, combined with the massive countermeasure deployment, confused the missile's seeker head. It didn't know which target to track, the engines that had suddenly gone cold or the flares burning bright. It chose wrong. The missile detonated in the middle of the chaff and flare cloud, 20 meters from the Hercules. The blast wave hit them like a hammer, knocking the already damaged aircraft into a spin. Alarms screamed, systems failed. The Hercules began falling from the sky. "Morrison, restart the engines!" I'm trying! Number 3 won't light off! The ground was rushing up to meet them. They had maybe 10 seconds before they hit. Corinne unbuckled from the gunner station and literally ran forward through a spinning aircraft, using her knowledge of the Hercules layout to navigate by feel as much as by sight. She reached the cockpit, threw herself into her seat, and grabbed the controls. I have the aircraft! She fought the spin, using differential power from the 3 working engines, deploying flaps asymmetrically, using every trick she knew. The Hercules was still spinning, still falling, but the rotation was slowing. 5 seconds to impact. The nose came up. The wings started to bite air. The spin stopped. 3 seconds. She applied full power to the 3 working engines. The Hercules shuddered, groaned, but began to pull up. 1 second, the aircraft leveled off at 500 feet, so low that they could see individual rocks on the desert floor. Corinne held it there, breathing hard, her hands shaking slightly on the controls. Above them, the F-16s were finishing off the remaining enemy fighters. She watched through the windscreen as 2 more aircraft fell from the sky, trailing smoke and fire. 8 down. The last 4 fighters broke off, fleeing at supersonic speed, pursued by the American fighters who were clearly not interested in letting them escape. Morrison was staring at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Did we just survive that? Check the cargo bay. Make sure everyone's still alive. The loadmaster's voice came through the intercom, shaky but functional. Cargo bay is secure. We've got some new injuries from the maneuvering, but everyone's alive. Captain, that was... Save it for the after-action report. Morrison, restart engine 3. We're still going to Kandahar and we're going to be on time. She looked at the navigation display. Incredibly, impossibly, they were only 4 minutes from their destination. Despite everything, the combat, the damage, the near-death experience, they'd stayed roughly on course. Engine 3 coughed to life, running rough but functional. Corinne nursed the damaged aircraft toward Kandahar, maintaining altitude through sheer willpower and expert flying. The radio crackled. Shrike 3, this is Kandahar Tower. We're tracking your approach. Emergency crews are standing by. What's your status? Corinne looked at her instruments. Left wing damaged, hydraulics failing, 1 engine compromised, fuel leaking, control surfaces barely responding, 20 wounded soldiers in the back, some of them critical. Kandahar Tower, Shrike 3. We're operational. Request direct approach to the field hospital pad. Shrike 3 acknowledged. And Captain? Don't know what you did out there, but the whole base is watching. Welcome home. The landing was rough. The damaged wing wanted to drop. The compromised hydraulics made control difficult, and the wounded landing gear made touchdown a gamble. But Corinne brought the Hercules down like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Firmly, professionally, getting everyone on the ground in one piece. The aircraft had barely stopped rolling when ambulances surrounded it, medics rushing to evacuate the wounded. Corinne ran through the shutdown checklist mechanically, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind was still processing what had just happened. Captain, Morrison said quietly, I've been flying for 3 years. I've logged 500 hours, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You did pretty well yourself, Lieutenant. That engine shutdown, that was brilliant thinking. I got lucky. Luck is what you make it. They exited the aircraft to find a crowd waiting. The base commander, intelligence officers, medical personnel, other pilots, all staring at the damaged Hercules like it was some kind of miracle that it had made it back at all. A full colonel approached, his expression unreadable. Captain Parker, I'm Colonel Richards, base commander. I need you and your crew to come with me. We need to debrief what just happened out there. Sir, can it wait until the wounded are taken care of? The wounded are being handled, but I need to understand how a transport pilot just shot down 4 enemy fighters and survived an engagement with 8 more. 8, sir, Corinne corrected. We got 4 before the F-16S arrived. The fighters got the other 4. Richard stared at her. You're telling me you personally shot down 8 enemy aircraft? 4 confirmed, sir. Maybe 5 if you count the one that flew into our fuel cloud. The exact count is unclear. In what aircraft? The one behind me, sir. C-130H, modified with the Experimental Defensive Weapons Package. That program was canceled 3 years ago. The program was canceled, sir. The equipment wasn't removed. Richards looked like he wanted to say something else, but the approaching F-16 pilots interrupted. They'd landed right behind the Hercules, eager to meet the transport pilot who'd held off an entire squadron. "Ma'am," the lead pilot said, offering his hand. "Captain Steve Harker, call sign Eagle 1. I've been flying fighters for 12 years, flown combat missions in 3 different theaters. And what you did today?" He shook his head in disbelief. "That was the most incredible flying I've ever witnessed. We were monitoring your engagement from 50 miles out. We didn't think you'd survive until we got there. Hell, we didn't think you'd survive after we got there." "I had help," Corinne said simply. "Morrison kept us in the air. The loadmaster kept the wounded stable. The corpsman kept people alive. It was a team effort. Ma'am, with respect, you flew a cargo plane through combat maneuvers that would ground most fighter pilots. You shot down enemy aircraft with weapon systems that weren't designed for that role. You kept 20 wounded soldiers alive through circumstances that should have killed everyone on board. That's not team effort. That's exceptional individual performance." Corinne was saved from having to respond by the arrival of the chief flight surgeon, who insisted that she and her crew undergo immediate medical evaluation. They were hustled off to the base hospital, where doctors checked them for injuries, shock, and any other effects of the sustained high-G maneuvering they'd endured. She was sitting in an examination room, waiting for the doctor to finish reviewing her vitals when Morrison knocked on the doorframe. "Captain? Got a minute?" "Come in, Lieutenant. How are you holding up?" "Better than I should be." He sat down in the chair next to her bed. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something. That defensive weapons package, the way you flew, the way you handled those fighters, that wasn't standard transport pilot training. Where did you learn to do that?" Corinne was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "You ever hear of the Fighter Weapons School?" "You mean Top Gun? The Navy program?" "Not just Navy. Air Force has its own version. Fighter Weapons Tactics Instruction, Advanced Combat Flying. I spent 2 years there before I transitioned to transports." Morrison's eyes widened. "You were a fighter pilot?" "F-15E Strike Eagle, 50 combat missions, 3 confirmed kills in air-to-air combat. Then I got injured during an ejection, spent 6 months in rehab, and was medically disqualified from flying fighters. Too much spinal damage. The high-G maneuvers could cause permanent paralysis, so they put you in transports. So I volunteered for transports, figured if I couldn't fly fighters I could still serve by moving cargo and personnel, still be useful, still contribute. But you kept the skills. You never lose them. You just get rusty. And then days like today happen, and you remember why you trained so hard in the first place." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you requested the aircraft with the weapons package? Because you knew you might need it?" "I requested it because I'd rather have weapons and not need them than need them and not have them. Same reason I've been practicing defensive flying in the simulator every week for the past 2 years. Same reason I kept current on weapon systems that don't exist on transport aircraft." "You were preparing?" "I was being paranoid. Turns out paranoia is sometimes justified." The doctor returned, declared Corinne fit for duty despite the stress and minor injuries, and released her. She walked back to the flight line, where maintenance crews were already swarming over the damaged Hercules, assessing what could be repaired and what would need to be replaced. The loadmaster, Technical Sergeant Mike Chen, met her at the aircraft. "Captain, the wounded soldiers wanted me to thank you. All 20 made it. The corpsman says 3 of them wouldn't have survived another hour. You got them here in time." "We got them here in time, Chen. Everyone played their part." "Ma'am, with respect, you're the one who kept this aircraft in the air when physics said it should fall. You're the one who fought off enemy fighters in a cargo plane. You're the one who brought everyone home alive. We all helped, but you're the one who made it possible." Corinne looked at her aircraft, scorched, battered, leaking fluids with holes punched through the fuselage and one wing barely functional. It looked like it had flown through hell, which, she supposed, it had. "It's a good aircraft," she said quietly. "Tougher than people think. All it needed was someone willing to push it to its limits. or beyond them. Sometimes beyond is where you need to go. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Intelligence officers wanted every detail of the engagement. Tactics experts wanted to understand how she'd survived. Weapons specialists wanted to know how the defensive systems had performed. The base commander wanted to know why she'd risked the aircraft and crew instead of aborting the mission. Corinne answered every question truthfully, walking them through her decision-making process, explaining the tactical considerations, describing the combat sequence. She showed them the gun camera footage, the threat warning logs, the flight data recorder information. When she finished, the room was silent. Finally, Colonel Richards spoke. "Captain Parker, what you did today was either the most brilliant piece of flying I've ever seen or the most reckless. I'm not sure which. Sir, I had 20 wounded soldiers who needed to get to a field hospital. Aborting the mission meant they would die. Continuing meant there was a chance, maybe a small chance, but a chance, that we could all survive. I chose the option that gave everyone the best odds of making it home alive. You engaged 12 enemy fighters in an unarmed transport aircraft. In a transport aircraft with defensive weapons, sir. There's a difference. A difference that saved lives," one of the intelligence officers interjected. "We've been tracking enemy air assets in this region for weeks, trying to figure out how to neutralize them. Captain Parker just eliminated most of their operational fighters in one engagement. That's going to significantly impact their ability to threaten our forces." Richards nodded slowly. "There's going to be an investigation. Headquarters is going to want to understand how and why this happened. There will probably be questions about the weapons package, about whether it should be reactivated as a program, about operational procedures." "I understand, sir. But I want you to know, and this is off the record, that what you did today represents exactly the kind of initiative and skill that the Air Force needs. You saw a problem, you found a solution, and you executed it flawlessly under impossible circumstances. Whatever comes from the investigation, you should be proud of that." "Thank you, sir. I am proud. Proud of my crew. Proud that we got everyone home. That's all that matters." The official investigation lasted 3 weeks. During that time, Corinne continued flying missions, though none that turned into combat engagements. The damaged Hercules was repaired and returned to service, this time with full authorization to carry its defensive weapons package. The investigation concluded that Corinne had acted within her authority as aircraft commander, making tactical decisions appropriate to the situation. It recommended that the defensive weapons program be reconsidered for transport aircraft operating in high-threat environments, but more importantly, it recommended that Captain Corinne Parker be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that day. The citation read, in part, "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight as pilot of a C-130H aircraft in a combat zone. Captain Parker's exceptional flying skill, tactical expertise, and unwavering determination resulted in the successful defense of her aircraft against overwhelming enemy fighter opposition while ensuring the safe transport of critically wounded personnel. Her actions resulted in the confirmed destruction of multiple enemy aircraft and the preservation of American lives. Captain Parker's proficiency and devotion to duty reflect great credit upon herself in the United States Air Force." The medal ceremony was small and informal. Just the base commander, her squadron, and some of the soldiers she'd saved. When Richards pinned the medal to her uniform, the wounded soldiers, most of them now recovered and mobile, stood and applauded. One of them, a young sergeant who'd been barely alive when they loaded him onto the Hercules, approached her after the ceremony. "Ma'am, I don't remember much from that day. But I remember hearing the fight happening, hearing you on the intercom telling everyone it would be okay, feeling the aircraft moving in ways that scared me even more than being wounded, and then waking up in the hospital, alive, because you got us here." "Just doing my job, Sergeant." "No, ma'am. You did a lot more than your job. You did something impossible. And I wanted to thank you for that, for not giving up, for fighting when you could have run, for bringing all of us home when we thought we were dead." Corinne felt her throat tighten. This was why she flew. Not for the medals or recognition, but for moments like this. for knowing that her skills, her training, her determination had made a difference in people's lives. Thank you, Sergeant. Now go home, see your family, live your life. That's all the thanks I need. 3 months later, Corinne received new orders. The Air Force was establishing a specialized training program for transport pilots operating in high-threat environments. They wanted her to develop the curriculum, to teach other pilots the tactics and techniques she'd used, to share the knowledge that had saved her life and the lives of everyone on her aircraft. She accepted immediately. The program started small, just a dozen pilots, hand-selected for their skill and potential. Corinne taught them everything she knew about defensive flying, about weapon systems, about making life-or-death decisions at altitude under fire. But more than tactics, she taught them attitude, the mindset that said transport pilots weren't just bus drivers, that cargo aircraft could be instruments of war when necessity demanded. That underestimation was a weapon that could be turned against those who wielded it. Morrison was one of her first students, and then he became an instructor himself, spreading the knowledge further, ensuring that future transport pilots would be ready when the impossible happened. On the last day of the first class, one of the students asked the question Corinne had been expecting. "Ma'am, what do we do when everyone underestimates us? When fighter pilots look down on us? When people assume we're not real combat pilots?" Corinne smiled, the same smile she'd worn when the enemy pilot had laughed at her over the radio, the smile that said she knew something they didn't. You let them underestimate you. You let them assume you're not a threat. And then, when the moment comes, when circumstances demand it, you show them exactly what a transport pilot can do. You remind them that skill isn't about the aircraft you fly, it's about the pilot flying it. And if they still don't believe it, then you do what I did. You survive. You win. You bring everyone home. And you let the results speak for themselves. She looked at her class, 12 pilots who'd come in thinking of themselves as glorified truck drivers, and were leaving as combat-ready aviators who understood that transport missions could become combat missions in the blink of an eye. "One more thing," she added. "What I did that day, fighting off 12 fighters, shooting down half of them, surviving against impossible odds, that wasn't superhuman. It wasn't luck. It was training, preparation, and the refusal to accept that defeat was inevitable. Every single one of you can do the same thing if you commit to the preparation, if you take the training seriously, if you remember that your job isn't just to move cargo, it's to complete the mission, whatever that takes. Even if it means fighting, especially if it means fighting. Because sometimes the only way to deliver your cargo is to go through people who don't want you to. And when that happens, you need to be ready. Not with excuses, not with calls for help, but with the skills and determination to handle the problem yourself." The class graduated 2 weeks later. Each pilot received a commemorative coin, struck with the image of a C-130 and the inscription, "Never underestimate a transport pilot." Corinne kept one for herself, a reminder of the day she'd proven what everyone in the transport community already knew, but the rest of the world needed to learn. That the most dangerous pilot in the sky isn't always the one flying the fighter jet. Sometimes it's the one flying the cargo plane who everyone dismissed, right up until the moment she reminded them that transport pilots were still pilots, still warriors, still capable of extraordinary things when circumstances demanded. And as Corinne stood on the tarmac, watching her students fly off to their new assignments, she thought about the 20 soldiers she'd saved, about Morrison and Chen and the rest of her crew, about the 4 or 5 or 8, depending on how you counted, enemy fighters that had learned the hard way that transport pilots weren't easy targets. She thought about all of this and smiled, because in the end, that's what it was about. Not the kills or the medal or the recognition, but the knowledge that when it mattered most, she'd done her job. She'd brought everyone home. And that was all a pilot could ask for. The story of Captain Corinne Parker's engagement spread through the Air Force like wildfire, becoming legend in the way military stories do. Half truth, half mythology, entirely inspiring. It became the stuff of ready room discussions and training scenarios, the impossible mission that proved nothing was truly impossible when skill met determination. 5 years later, the defensive weapons package had been installed on 75 transport aircraft. The training program Corinne developed had graduated 200 pilots, and not a single C-130 with the package and a trained crew had been lost to enemy fighters. Her legacy was written in the safety of every transport pilot who followed, in the lives saved by crews who refused to accept that they were helpless targets. Corinne herself had moved on to other assignments, eventually becoming the commander of an entire airlift squadron. But she never forgot that day. Never forgot the lessons it taught her about preparation, determination, and the importance of never accepting that defeat was inevitable. She kept that commemorative coin in her pocket on every flight, a tangible reminder that reputation meant nothing compared to capability. And sometimes, when she was flying routine missions on quiet days, she'd think about those 20 wounded soldiers, about Morrison's brilliant thinking with the engine shut down, about Chen's steady presence in the cargo bay, about the F-16 pilots who'd arrived in time to help finish the fight. Most of all, she'd think about the moment when she'd decided not to abort, when she'd chosen to fight instead of run, when she'd trusted her training, her skills, and her aircraft to see her through circumstances that should have been impossible. That was the moment that defined everything that came after. The moment when she stopped being just a transport pilot and became something more. Not because the job changed, but because she proved what the job could be when someone was willing to push beyond the expected, beyond the safe, beyond the limits everyone else accepted. She'd shown the world that courage didn't require a fighter jet or a call sign, just the willingness to stand when others would run. Her story became required reading at the Air Force Academy, studied alongside historical battles and tactical innovations. Young pilots learned her name before they learned to fly, understanding that the most important weapon in any aircraft wasn't the guns or missiles, but the person at the controls who refused to quit when quitting would have been easier. Years later, when she finally retired after 25 years of service, the ceremony was attended by hundreds of pilots she'd trained, soldiers she'd saved, and leaders she'd inspired. They came not just to honor her accomplishments, but to thank her for changing how the entire Air Force thought about transport operations. In her retirement speech, Corinne kept it simple. "I was just a pilot who did what needed to be done. But if my story proves anything, it's that labels don't define capability. Being called a transport pilot didn't make me less of a warrior. It just meant I had to prove it in ways people didn't expect. And maybe that's the real lesson, that we're all capable of more than others think, more than we sometimes think ourselves. We just need the courage to prove it when the moment arrives." The audience stood in applause, understanding that they'd witnessed not just a retirement, but the end of an era defined by one pilot's refusal to accept limitations others placed on her. Years later, when she finally retired after 25 years of service, the ceremony was attended by hundreds of pilots she'd trained, soldiers she'd saved, and leaders she'd inspired. They came not just to honor her accomplishments, but to thank her for changing how the entire Air Force thought about transport operations. In her retirement speech, Corinne kept it simple. "I was just a pilot who did what needed to be done. But if my story proves anything, it's that labels don't define capability. Being called a transport pilot didn't make me less of a warrior. It just meant I had to prove it in ways people didn't expect. And maybe that's the real lesson, that we're all capable of more than others think, more than we sometimes think ourselves. We just need the courage to prove it when the moment arrives." The audience stood in applause, understanding that they'd witnessed not just a retirement, but the end of an era defined by one pilot's refusal to accept limitations others placed on her. Among the crowd stood Morrison, now a major with his own command, Chen, who had become a senior enlisted advisor, and 12 of the 20 soldiers she'd saved that day, men who made it a point to attend, to stand as living proof that her impossible decision had been the right one. The wounded sergeant who'd thanked her years ago approached one final time, now fully recovered and serving as an instructor himself. Ma'am, I tell my students about you, about the pilot who refused to leave us behind. Some of them don't believe it, think it's an exaggerated war story. But those of us who were there, we know the truth. You didn't just save our lives, you showed us what real courage looks like. Corinne shook his hand, her eyes reflecting years of service and sacrifice. You would have done the same for me, Sergeant. That's what we do. We bring each other home. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Corinne walked one last time to the flight line where a restored C-130, the very aircraft she'd flown that day, sat as a permanent memorial. Its tail number preserved, its battle damage marks carefully maintained, a plaque beneath it reading, "In honor of Captain Corinne Parker and all transport pilots who proved that heroism isn't about the aircraft you fly, but the heart of the pilot flying it." She placed her hand on the fuselage, feeling the metal that had held together through impossible circumstances, remembering the weight of 20 lives depending on her, the fear and determination that had driven every decision. "Thank you, old friend," she whispered to the aircraft. "We did good work together." Behind her, the sun set over the airfield, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The C-130 stood silent but proud, a testament to the day when one transport pilot rewrote the rules and proved that sometimes the most dangerous warrior is the one nobody sees coming. And in that moment, Corinne Parker knew her legacy was secure, not in medals or commendations, but in every transport pilot who would fly into danger knowing they were more than just bus drivers. They were warriors, protectors, and when necessary, they were fighters who would never abandon those who counted on them. That was the real victory. Not the fighter she'd shot down, but the mindset she'd changed forever.